Hey, what's up, Funkheads? If you're an avid watcher of my channel, you know that sometimes I'll make a joke that's not exactly kid-friendly, or I'll say a bad word here and there, or I might make a reference to beer and being drunk or something like that. And I'll get comments from people telling me that pops are for kids. Collecting plastic, can you please clean up your channel because my child likes watching it, but I hate when you curse or your skits are kind of adult themed. Pretty much just asking me to make the channel rated G. But then it gets me to thinking that a lot of pops that Funko makes aren't exactly for kids. They're from properties that are pretty strong R's, or moralist characters, violent characters, sexually deviant characters. And a lot of the pop boxes do say 14 plus, 17 plus. Plus pops aren't exactly a toy that I see kids playing with. I mean, they're not really articulated. They don't really have play features to them. I've always seen pops as something geared towards adult collectors. And there's been a couple of recent pops put out that have been controversial or taboo. So I decided to make a list of what I personally feel to be the top 10 most taboo Funko Pops that have been produced so far. Keep in mind, this is my opinion. Yours may differ, or I may have overlooked a pop here and there. If I did, let me know in the comments which ones you think are more controversial or more taboo than the ones I selected. Jay from the Kevin Smith multiverse is pretty much a foul-mouthed stoner drug dealer. He brags about snorting coke, drinking beers, banging anything that moves. Pretty much anything that comes out of his mouth, you don't want your children to hear. And that's why Jay makes my top 10. At first glance, if you don't know this character and you see this pop, it looks pretty innocent. But if you know who Jay is, he's definitely not for children. Arseface from the Preacher TV series can be considered taboo by actual comic book fans that really wanted comic book versions of the Preacher characters. But this guy made my list because there's not very many pops out there that have a curse word on the actual box, and that really does look like a butthole on his face. And spoiler warning, the reason his face looks like that is because he put a shotgun in his mouth and tried to commit suicide and screwed it all up and pretty much deformed his face, turned himself into the Arseface, and this character becomes a running gag in the comic book, to a lesser extent in the TV show, but he is also used for laughs in the TV show, and it's pretty twisted when you think about it. Character tries to commit suicide, screws it up, and he's played for laughs. And now he's a Funko Pop. Travis Bickle is the main character in maybe one of the darkest movies I've ever seen, Taxi Driver. It's about maybe the loneliest person in New York who is on the verge of pretty much losing his mind. He starts stalking a politician, he starts stalking a woman, gets her to go on a date with him, takes her to a porn theater, buys guns, starts shaving his head into a mohawk like ready to go to war. The thought of actually killing the politician he stalks crosses his mind. He actually goes out to try to do it. He befriends a 13-year-old prostitute. The movie in general is just filled with a bunch of really awful characters, some real lowlives, and it ends in one of the most violent, bloodiest scenes in movie history. It really is a great movie with a great performance by De Niro. But it's a very controversial movie and character, and I'm surprised they made a pop out of him. Pretty much all the characters from Pulp Fiction aren't appropriate for children, but I chose Jimmy to put on this list because he was played by Quentin Tarantino, who's the director, and he also wrote the movie. But he has maybe the most notorious mini monologue in the entire movie. A couple of the characters accidentally kill somebody. They take him to Jimmy's house to just get off the road before a cop sees him. And Jimmy just goes off about how his house isn't dead N-word storage and how storing dead N-words isn't his business. And at the time that the movie was released, a lot of people were really offended by that scene, especially with Jimmy being a white character and using the N-word so liberally. And I gotta admit, when I first saw it, it did make me cringe a bit. And maybe Quentin Tarantino could have written that scene without the N-word and still gotten the point across, but that's not really his style. Like Jay, this Jimmy Pop looks very innocent, but he definitely represents a very taboo movie and a very taboo scene. No surprise here, Tony Montana, Scarface himself, makes this list. He's basically a coke dealer and a murderer who also happens to steal another man's wife and generally makes everybody around him miserable and dead. The movie is full of drugs, violence, and foul language, so it's kind of funny that they made such an inherently evil character into a cute little pop. Sid Vicious was the bassist for the Sex Pistols, and he is one of the most notorious heroin addicts of all time. When you can't even get your shit together enough to stay in a punk band, that's when you know you got some real problems. The thing that made him the most infamous, though, was he was arrested for the murder of his girlfriend, Nancy. He couldn't get his story straight on it. You know, he said that they fought that night. Nancy ended up getting stabbed and bleeding to death. Sid said he couldn't remember stabbing her. Later on, he said that she fell onto the knife. It's pretty obvious that he killed her. And not long after that, he ended up dying of a heroin overdose from heroin supplied by his mom. Pretty dark stuff. He was one of the most out-of-control musicians of all time. The Jesus from The Big Lebowski is a pedophile. There is even a scene in the movie where he has to go to his neighbor's house and let him know that he was arrested for exposing himself to children. And I'm not very religious myself, but I can still see why naming a pedophile Jesus is a little bit controversial. He is played for laughs in the movie, but he is a really dark character. Captain Spaulding from House of a Thousand Corpses, and more specifically The Devil's Rejects, is maybe the most vile and disgusting clown in any movie. And that's hard to do. He's part of the Firefly family, who are just a big group of rapists and murderers. Out of all the mainstream movies out there, The Devil's Rejects is probably the last movie you'll ever want your kids to get a hold of. It is just chock full of fucked up stuff. Twin Peaks doesn't have any overtly violent or sexual scenes in it. There isn't a lot of foul language either, but it is a pretty dark show. It revolves around the murder of Laura Palmer, and this is pretty much her corpse. This is dead Laura Palmer, wrapped in plastic and tape. That stuff you see on her face is grit, pebbles, and dirt, and her skin is pale and her lips are blue because she is dead. This pop is basically a dead girl from a crime scene. Super, super dark. People actually started a petition to try to stop Funko from making this pop. Obviously, it didn't work, and they haven't been pulled from shelves or anything, but I can see how this did offend some people. And the number one most taboo Funko Pop in my book is Alex DeLarge. Specifically, the Alex DeLarge with that mask on, because he only wears that mask in one scene, and it is a rape scene. A very prolonged rape scene with cartoony music in the background. In the movie, that's chock full of rape and violence, where most of the characters that commit these crimes don't even get their comeuppance. A Clockwork Orange is one of the most controversial movies of all time, and it's usually on those most controversial, most taboo movie lists of all time. So it is pretty crazy to me that they made Alex DeLarge, especially wearing that mask, because pretty much he is an unrepentant, murderous, serial rapist hooligan. Alright guys, that was my list of the top 10 most taboo Funko Pops. Let me know if you agree or disagree, or which pops should have made this list. Whether you own any of these pops or not, which taboo pops you would like Funko to make, or if you've heard of other taboo pops that Funko plans to make in the future. Alright guys, thanks for watching and take it easy.